Hello, and welcome to a presentation about twice exceptional students, myths, identification, and strategies for providing services. My name is Kathy Anderson, and I am the Gifted and Talented Education Program Consultant for the Kentucky Department of Education. Today's objectives are to look at the myths surrounding twice exceptional students, to also talk about how we identify twice exceptional students, and also how do we support or provide services for twice exceptional students. So let's begin by just talking about what is a twice exceptional student. In order to do this, what I've done in the past is I've had attendees do a gallery walk around a room. I generally put up 4 posters with autism spectrum disorder on one chart paper. Then on another paper, I have specific learning disability. On another paper, there is emotional behavior disorder. And then on the 4th paper is gifted and talented. And on each of these papers, there is a T-chart. And so I ask for participants to list challenges and strengths for each of these populations of students. Some of the challenges that have been listed that are the same for all 4 groups over the years have been students have a difficulty interacting with peers, have trouble with communication. Another challenge has been a anxiety, also depression sometimes. Strengths, though, for all 4 groups over a period of time have been uh, uh, having a passion or interest for certain topics or ideas. Another strength has been high cognitive ability in a certain area. Um, Also, maybe another strength has been, a witty sense of humor or the ability to define humor in different situations. So these are some of the similarities that participants have found when we look at these 4 populations of students, these 4 categories of students. According to the National Association of Gifted Children, twice exceptional students are those who have characteristics of gifted students with the potential for high achievement and give evidence of one or more disabilities as defined by federal or state eligibility criteria. So, in other words, a twice exceptional student is a student who is gifted in one or more categories, but also has a disability. So look at these following famous people and what are their achievements and contributions of these twice exceptional individuals. So here in this slide, we see Temple Grandin, Thomas Edison, Stephen Hawking, Robin Williams, and James Earl Jones. All of these famous people had a disability, but then they also had many strengths and talents. For example, Thomas Edison could not speak very well until he was about 12 years old, and then he continued to really have difficulties writing throughout his career. James Earl Jones, for example, had a speech impediment, and his high school teacher encouraged him to read a poem every day in class, hoping this would help him to overcome his speech impediment. And as we all know, James Earl Jones is a very famous actor. Let's next talk about the gifted regulations as they regard special considerations and exceptions to the criteria for identification for gifted children. So this gifted regulation, which comes from section 3, subsections 3 of the gifted regulation, talks about that a local school district must have a system for diagnostic screening and identification of strengths, which provides equal access for racial and ethnic minority children, disadvantaged children, and children with disabilities. Gifted regulation, section 4.2, talks about that school staff must take into consideration environmental, cultural, and disabling conditions which may mask a child's true abilities. And some of the populations that are mentioned in the regulation to consider are students with disabilities, disadvantaged students, and underachieving students. So it's very important that when we have staff, such as the Gifted and Talented Identification and Placement Committee, that those staff understand that as they are reviewing the criteria and the evidences gathered for the students who are being considered for the gifted program, that they take into consideration that that student may have a disability of some kind, and that disability may be keeping them from maybe scoring at the 9th STAY-9, which we'll see in a moment, is criteria for general intellectual ability and for specific academic aptitude. So let's look at the categories for giftedness in Kentucky. In our state, we have 5 different categories, and we're going to talk about each one of these categories very quickly. So for general intellectual ability, these students have the characteristics for being able to have abstract reasoning. They also have high social awareness, their nonverbal ability, and their analysis. They have much high potential for this. Also, they have an outstanding mental capacity as compared to children of their age. The gifted regulation says in order to identify these students for the Gifted and Talented program, it must be determined by the student scoring at the 9th STAY-9 on a full-scale comprehensive test of intellectual ability. Other evidence that could be gathered for this student would include high performance on an additional individual or group intellectual test, or observation of applied advanced reasoning ability, or checklist of inventories of behaviors that are specific to underachieving or disadvantaged gifted learners. Next, let's talk about specific academic aptitude. In our state, we look at 4 different categories within this particular category, and those categories are language arts, math, science, and social studies. And so in this particular category, students who are referred and shown to have specific academic ability demonstrate an exceptionally high level in understanding beyond their chronological peers for a specific category, as I've named before, such as language arts, math, science, or social studies. So in order for a student to be identified in one of these areas for a specific academic aptitude, the student must score at the 9th STAY-9 or at the 96th percentile and above on a test that has a composite score. And on this achievement test, the student would score at the 96th percentile or above. That composite score would be at the 96th percentile or above. Other evidence for specific academic aptitude also include high performance on an additional or group test, student awards or critiques of performances, off-level testing, which means the student might be in 3rd grade, but they take the end of 4th grade assessment, portfolio of high academic performances, which might mean that they have gathered, other evidence that they put in a folder, which might include unit assessments or work samples, and also student progress data, which might mean, for example, report card grades or showing mastery of certain standards. The next area is creativity. So a student that has been identified or is being thought of to be a creative student means that the student demonstrates to be able to perform at a very high level the creative reasoning, insight and imagination, being able to solve problems in unique ways. These students are identified through use of informal or formal assessment measures of a child's capacity for originality of thought, fluency, or elaboration, and flexibility of thought. Other evidence could include creative writing samples, high scores on tests of creative ability, behavioral checklist or observations of original ideas, products, or problem solving. Another area is leadership, and leadership means that the student possesses either a potential or a demonstrated ability to perform at exceptionally high levels with social skills or interpersonal qualities such as poise or effective oral or written expression, or perhaps their ability to manage other students towards set goals or to organize others to successfully reach goals. The criteria for leadership are to be determined by a variety of informal measures and documentation of a student's willingness to assume leadership roles in class, a student organization, and a community activity. Other evidence could include sociograms, which are questionnaires which are designed to assess leadership, or peer recommendations, which means the students in the child's class or grade level could give recommendations that they see for students in their class that possess leadership ability. Also, behavioral checklists or observations that are specific to leadership behavior. It could be portfolio entries which display leadership qualities, or offices that are held by a student in extracurricular activities or in class government. The last category is visual and performing arts. And so this means these are students who have outstanding ability for production or accomplishment in the arts or creativity in visual art, dance, music, or drama. These students are identified through the evidence of a performance, which could include auditions or letters of recommendation or a product or portfolio assessment by specialists or professional artists. Other evidence could include awards or critiques of performance or a portfolio of visual or performing arts ability. So next, let's talk about how do we identify twice exceptional students. So again, these are students that may have a disability or do have a disability and are also identified in one or more of the categories we just talked about previously. So let's talk about the evaluation process. So districts must have policies and procedures for screening students. And so some best practices for screening students would be to ensure that all students at an age level have the ability to to audition or to take an assessment which shows their ability. Also, we want to make sure that we provide accommodations for students that have disabilities. That doesn't mean everything in the kitchen sink, but it does mean that those who are administrating the test or the assessment process need to review the student's individual education program or their 504 plan to see what types of accommodations those students should be receiving when they are assessed. And also, it's really important not to look at just one data point, but it's important to look at the whole child and to gather multiple evidences for that student. When assessing a student, especially formal assessment, it's important again to make sure that accommodations for students are provided. Also, it's important when you look at the scores to look for any discrepancies that might be within an assessment of subtest. For example, the student may have very high verbal scores, but perhaps their processing scores may be lower. But like I said before, maybe they have an outstanding score on another subtest. That could be a flag to look into that more for that student. Also, it's important to provide nonverbal assessments when appropriate. Many of our assessments that we give for cognitive assessment are written and do not have lots of written instructions and stories and items for students to read. So it would be important to think about maybe having a cognitive test that doesn't have as much written content and maybe has more pictures, puzzles for students to assess. Also, if we've got students who have been referred for art or for music, it would be important to assist that student to practice or to gather their materials to be assessed, because some students haven't had that opportunity to audition or to gather up their materials for a portfolio. Then it's very important to train and communicate regarding special considerations and disabling conditions that might mask or give talents. So as we talked about before, there are regulations around special considerations for students. So it's important for our committee who is looking at the evidence for students for them to understand that special considerations must be given to those students who have a disability. Next, what I generally do when I'm doing this with an in-person crowd is we look at 3 different case studies. We look at Alicia, who's an elementary student. We look at Wilfredo, who's a middle school student, and we look at Jerry, who is a high school student. And what I ask for participants to do is to read through the scenario and highlight the strengths and the challenges of the student, and then discuss how the strengths can be used to improve the challenges. For example, with Alicia, Alicia is a student who is very interested in horses. She has high verbal ability. She is able to quickly process new information. She also enjoys art and drawing horses. But when it comes to spelling tests and reading, Alicia is very challenged. And so when we talk about Alicia, I ask the participants to say, could this be a twice exceptional student? And most of the participants agree that yes, the student could be considered as a twice exceptional student, but that we would need to gather the resources or the evidences that are mentioned in the scenario, such as her high ability for reasoning and critical thinking, maybe some portfolio examples of her artwork, those types of things. Next, I ask participants to look at jot down forms. And so the jot down forms can be found in the Gifted and Talented Coordinator Sample Handbook. There are 5 of these forms, with the forms also broken down into the other subsets that we've talked about before. And the forms are like a table, and they list characteristics for that particular category of giftedness. And what staff can do is, as they see those characteristics in a student, they can write in the little table, in the cell of the table, the name of the student that has that characteristic, and then begin collecting evidence for that student that they could then refer that student for the Gifted and Talented program. Let's next look at profiles of twice exceptional students. We're going to look at 3 of these. And these are also could be considered myths if you think about it this way. So profile 1 is just try harder profile. So these are students who are identified as gifted, but they have an undetected learning disability. And so the characteristics of these students are they have large vocabularies, excellent verbal abilities, but sometimes their handwriting and their spelling often contradict their verbal ability. They may look like they're on grade level. And this is causing their learning disability to be overlooked. And then also the identification of their disabilities could offer an understanding of their academic difficulties and also help to ease their frustration within the school. But as I said before, These are students who are gifted, but because they're gifted, they may be able to overcome their disability, at least for a while. Profile number 2 is the just average profile. These are students that could be twice exceptional. However, they are not identified for giftedness or for a student with a disability. And so what happens sometimes is their superior intelligence compensates for their learning disability. They receive instruction in the general classroom and often perform at grade level. So there aren't any red flags that come up for this student. Often they are functioning below their potential because they are struggling, and maybe their gifts or talents are compensating and washing out any disability that the student might have. Often what happens is as the student goes on through their school career, that their talents emerge in specific content areas or they become noticed later in life. Profile number 3 is the can't be gifted profile. And so these are students who are identified with a disability, but their exceptionality abilities are unrecognized or unidentified. And so these students are more often identified than those in previous two groups because they stand out in the classroom. So they often fail in school and are noticed because of their disability, not because of their talents. Little attention is given to their strengths. These students become more aware of their difficulties in learning and feel like a failure more than a successful person. And often over time, this negative outlook of these students can lead to disruptive classroom behavior or feelings of low self-esteem. These are some common strengths and challenges of students who are twice exceptional. As we've talked about before, sometimes they have a superior vocabulary. They can be highly creative, resourceful, curious, but on the other hand, they can be easily frustrated, stubborn, opinionated. They can have inconsistent academic performance and also have difficulty with social interactions. Here are the ramifications of overlooking TUI students. As they go on, if they're not identified early, they're less likely to be identified later. Their future educational plans may be compromised because they did not receive the support they needed as a young person in the classroom. And this, of course, could lead to the student choosing to drop out of school. So how can we support twice exceptional students? Here are 4 key elements for helping twice exceptional students. First of all, these students need a nurturing environment. They need someone who really understands them and will encourage them to develop their potential. Also, they may need learning strategies that help them to think and to promote their high level of problem solving. Also, they may need social and emotional support. Students who are twice exceptional could be on the autism spectrum. They may have many difficulties communicating with other students, with other teachers and professors as they go through school. And so it's really important to support them and help them to understand how to communicate effectively. Also, they need strength-based or interest-based programs that help us to see their strengths and their passions, that look at what they're really interested in rather than looking at their deficits. Something else to consider is differentiation for these students. And as we know, the 3 main components of differentiation are content, which is what students should know and understand and be able to do. The process, which are the activities that are designed to help students make sense of the content. And then the product, which is the way in which students demonstrate and extend what they have learned. Let's take a look at how this looks for twice exceptional students. So let's look at the strength and then the adaptations that might be needed. So the strength for the student may be that we pre-test to find out what students know to eliminate unnecessary drill and practice. So if we have a student that is really strong in math, there's no sense in having them do many different types of problems to show that they know how to do the problem. If their strength is math and they already know how to do it, it's really important to pre-test that student to see what they already know. Then it's very important to guide students to make interest-based learning choices. So if they're interested in a certain type of topic, say in social studies or in science, it's important to know what is that student really passionate about when it comes to that particular area, because this can help us in planning the process as well as the products that student may want to choose. And then also, if you've got a student who is really interested in something, it's very important to give them the chance to explore that content, to dive deeper and to explore issues and problems that could be a part of that curriculum or that topic that they're interested in. However, on the other hand, 2E students may need assistance in accessing the information. They may not be able to maybe to read all the information. They may need some assistive technology to help them with that. Again, they may need different types of print or supplemental text in order to accommodate their reading levels. Let's think about differentiating the process. So we want students to become self-reliant learners. We want students to not be dependent on us to feed them the content, but for them to be able to understand and to read and understand the content. But at the same time, these tasks need to be based on their readiness. And so this is important to gather information on that student's interest and their learning profile. Also, as I said before, we want them to become self-reliant learners. And so in order to do this, we need to encourage their creativity and their skills of fluency and flexibility and originality of thought and elaboration. However, on the other side, for differentiating process, 2E learners may need to be encouraged to make sense of an idea of how to learn the content. Also, they may need graphic organizers to help them synthesize the information, to help them break it down into manageable bits that they can understand. Also, it's important to teach investigation and research skills. And so, as we know, when we go on to our computers or our laptops and we're researching topics, there can be a lot of information there for students to explore. And so it's really important for us to help students understand that they don't have to read every single thing that they see, and learn how to scan and to look for the important information as they research different topics. Then finally, differentiating the product. And so this is the way that students show us what they know, their performance, if you will. And so we want to think about building on strengths, giving choices for assignments, not saying you have to do it this way and this is the only way you can show me what you know. Also having products to help students connect with their learning to the real world, which helps students to know that this is important. This is something they're going to use later in life. And also to encourage self-evaluation based upon agreed criteria. It's important for students to be able to look at their work and say, well, this could be better, or maybe I can improve here, but to also have a measuring stick for them to look at themselves, rubrics of some kind, some way to evaluate their product. On the other hand, some adaptations that might be needed would be, a support of the different types of materials and technologies. Also helping students break down these projects into manageable steps to develop a timeline. I know for myself as a gifted musician, there would be auditions and things that would come up, and I might not be prepared for them because I've waited to the last minute to prepare. I want to prepare, but I wasn't sure how to get to that point. And so it's important to have somebody who's going to support that student to break it down into manageable rehearsal times or manageable times to work on the product. Also, it's really important to help students develop skills that are needed to create authentic products. And for example, for me, it was really important for me to develop better rehearsal processes so that when it came time to actually perform, I was ready. Another thing that's very important is there needs to be collaboration between our special ed staff and our gifted teachers, our gifted staff. They need to communicate with each other and talk about times that the special ed services will be given, and then also time for the student to receive their gifted services as well. It's important that the gifted teacher coordinator be invited to ARC meetings so that they know what special needs that student has, and also so that GT staff can give input about that student's strengths and abilities. Here are some resources that can be found on the Gifted Education's webpage. We have many different types of gifted and talented resources. Um, there are links to the regulation, but as well as links to the regulation, there is also information for parents about the 5 different categories. There are information about primary talent pool. There's also a frequently asked questions document there as well. Then there's our links of interest. We have links to the Gatton Academy and to the Craft Academy. We have links to other interests for gifted and talented education. One of those links would be the National Research Center on Gifted Education, which is at the University of Connecticut. And there's also many resources underneath the Davidson Institute. And this one in particular is for twice exceptional students. The National Association for Gifted Children has many resource articles on twice exceptional students. I've listed several there for you, and I hope that these are helpful if you have a time to read them. Again, my name is Kathy Anderson. This is my contact information. I hope that this information has been helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me either through phone or through email. Thank you very much.